Cool. Hey, everybody. I thought maybe today we'd show the current progress of automation that Ryan has been posting on our internal Slack channel. Been super cool. So let's, and this will be kind of like just a meeting that we needed to have anyway. I needed to have with Ryan and John, and normally Mark would be here too, but he's out today. So yeah. So Ryan, maybe you can share your screen and just kind of show what we're working on.
Sure. So we've been working on automation for Logic 2. It's been, a feature that people really want. We had it in Logic 1. And so now we're working on adding it to Logic 2. So let me, 1 second.
And I would also add that it wasn't particularly good in Logic 1. And our goal with this time around is to make it like a modern API. It's easy to develop, easy to understand just by looking at the code. Yeah, and we'll build on it over time.
Yeah, for sure. So
Trying to find the share screen button.
just like setting some, actually opening the application.
You can show the sausage being made. It's not,
Okay.
Are you on what are you, this is Windows, right?
Yes. Yes.
Do you normally use Windows or you normally use Linux?
It depends. I'm on Windows mostly right now. I tend to stick with a certain, like I'll end up switching between them, but usually
Stick for a while.
kind of stay on one while I'm developing certain features. I don't usually switch back and forth all the time, other than for testing.
So what do we got? What do we see in here?
Yeah, so I mean, this is Logic 2, obviously on the right side. Left side is just a just a terminal. So what we have set up right now is we have this gRPC server running on Logic 2 and a Python client that can connect to that. So
is it over a socket?
Run. Yeah, exactly.
Like some sort of local host kind of thing?
Yeah, right now it's just bound to localhost. And there's just a specific port that you can connect to with gRPC. That's configurable. The idea here being that really one of the goals was we want to have a really great Python API, but we also want to be able to support other languages. So it's really easy for us to generate bindings for other languages. The Python API that we have is kind of a wrapper around the gRPC and protobuf code that just makes it a little more Pythonic and a little easier to use. Yeah, another thing that we've heard from people is they really like to also be able to do kind of remote automation, and so doing this gRPC style also enables that sort of thing. So anyway, I'll show a quick demonstration. What we have right now, and this is super early, we've kind of just started on this last week. And what we have right now is the ability to, from the automation API, load captures, save captures, add analyzers, and export raw data and export analyzer data. We also have the ability to start capture. I don't have that over on my system. John will show a quick demo of that after this, but I'll go ahead and run. So we're using PyTest for tests on the Python side. I'll go ahead and just run one of the PyTest tests just to kind of show it working. Let me just give me 1 second. I'm gonna find a good one to run real quick. Let's see. Let's do. One of the things that, most of these tests will just like open up a capture and then immediately close it. So
Oh,
it's
right,
kind of
right.
hard to see what's going on. So
That's
there's a
okay.
small modification to one of these. So this one right here is just going to add it's going to open up a capture and then add 10 analyzers to it. Yeah, we'll go ahead and run that one. So test mini analyzers. Oh, it's not working. Let's see what happened. Yeah, so maybe, oh, I hold on one second. We recently I changed the port on the server side.
Is there kind of any issue with like multiple connections and like leaving a port hanging open or anything like that?
Only if you launch multiple instances of the application.
Okay, so you might want to look at that.
Thing like server side.
Well, I just mean other situations users might get into where like for whatever reason all of a sudden their script doesn't work anymore because there's a hanged script that's still running or some kind of, yeah, anyway.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to update the port.
So that's cool. We got the little automation thing down there.
Yeah, it's enabled right now. So we have this in here. So if it's enabled, it'll show up down here. Just to let you know that it's open.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I went ahead and reran it with the correct port, and you can see it opening, or opening up this capture, adding a bunch of analyzers, and then at that point you can go and you can close the capture, but you can that's pretty boring. Probably what you want to do is actually extract some data. So at that point you would export analyzer data.
Mm-hmm.
We support all of the ways that you would, but at least currently, or eventually, I should say, all the ways that you would export data for analyzers. So for custom analyzers, you can go and implement your own your own export code, I guess, and that's usually executed via this command. And then we also have our data table here, which you can also export data from, and all of that's accessible from the API as well. Let me see. Show maybe one more. You can also run these in parallel. So one thing that sometimes comes up is that people want to be able to, run a capture and then export quite a bit of data, but then run another capture after that. And so you can do that. Most of the calls, at least currently, the way we've designed it is to be kind of cater to the most common use case, which really is something like create a new capture or start a capture, do something with your device under test, and then stop the capture at some point in time in the future, and then export that data. At that point, you may want to go and run another capture while you're exporting that data if it's going to take a while. So you can do that. It does require the user to, basically you have to multi-thread it from the Python side, because most of the calls we have in there
are blocking.
Are blocking, yeah. And again, that's kind of to cater to the most common use case, which really is like,
sure. But you could, I guess, what would you do? Like you could spawn a new instance of your, what would be the easiest way to do it? Would be like a, spawn a new, like from Bash or something. I don't know. I'm not sure. You spawn a new,
yeah, I suppose you could do
Python
that
instance or something.
If you wanted to do it that way, you could do it that way. The other way that you could do that is just run multiple threads from
Python
within your Python script. Yeah.
Okay.
Or it doesn't, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, you can really use the bindings from any language. We'll make them available. So you'd be able to generate bindings from our gRPC definitions or from our proto files. So you'd be able to do that for C++ or, whatever language.
Well,
is
people
supported.
before use C# a lot because I think because we provided an environment to kind of get started with that.
Yeah.
Market.
Yeah.
So what do you envision the experience being like? Hey, I want to use C# with this thing. Like, how do I get started? I mean, obviously today we don't. But what is that going to look like near term and then maybe longer term?
Yeah, I mean, I think short term we'll make the .proto files available, and using those, you can use the the gRPC toolchain to go and generate files for instance, in this case, C#, and then you'd be able to go and you'd be able to use the generated code from that directly.
No, it seems like we could set that up in some kind of CI environment where we automatically publish for 500 different languages and just dump the stuff someplace. Not 500, but I mean we just make it a little bit easier. Is that realistic or?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, I think probably what we do is provide just kind of a base code base that somebody could fork off of and then build their stuff on top of. I'd also imagine that, like, for something like C# where a lot of people use it, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody started like an open source project to add a nice wrapper around those bindings.
Right.
The gRPC code that gets generated is pretty good, but it's definitely not going to be super, I guess, catered to the language that it's generated for. Like the reason that we're writing these wrappers for Python is just to make it more Pythonic, a little more comfortable to use. That's kind of the main goal.
Got it. Okay.
And so I imagine for anybody using from a different language is going to at least want to write a really thin layer. Like on the Python side, it is, a super thin layer between the gRPC generated code and the APIs that we're going to be providing. So, and I should mention, I think all this is probably just going to be open source. Like we're going to provide the proto files. We're going to provide all of the, for any wrappers we write, we'll just make it public. It's not like,
sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe what we could do next is maybe John, you could show what you've been working on recently for this, and then maybe we could take a look at the API itself and some of the code or kind of how behind the scenes how it works.
Sure. Let me share my screen. Okay. Yeah, so what I've been working on is in particular starting a capture, stopping a capture, waiting for a capture to complete if you're using a trigger. So what I have set up right now is starting a capture with a particular device, in this case, a simulation device. You have all of your settings here. You can set which channels you want enabled, glitch filter, and a bunch of other capture settings where you want to stop on a digital trigger. We want to stop after 5 seconds, that kind of thing. Set up the digital trigger. So if I go and run the script right here, we should start the capture and we find our trigger almost immediately, and then we record for 5 seconds, and then you can see it's a rising edge trigger with some state requirements for the other channels, and we hit that pretty quickly.
Yeah, this is the simulation here, right?
Yeah, simulation data. So yeah, that's all all you really need to do start a capture is the stuff here, and this is the only reason there's so many lines of code here is because this was a relatively sophisticated setup with glitch filters and a bunch of digital trigger conditions and things like that. But yeah, it's pretty brief. To use the Python API for this. Using the gRPC API is actually not even much more complicated. It would probably be, maybe 50% more code to go and do that directly.
So you've generated some kind of you've generated some kind of gRPC library that this is linked against or something. Can we actually take a look at that generated code? Is that basically the API?
Sure. Yeah. So the generated code is not particularly pretty. but it follows a pretty set pattern. Let me expand this a little bit. So it'll, that's the server side. Where's the client side?
So does this
There
define
it is.
both types and functions? Is that kind of the idea?
Yes. So there's two different files. One has all of the types set up. So various settings, various requests and replies that are sent to the server. And then this server code here sets up a class that will let you call those easily with requests. So to see how that's kind of used, if you look at the automation code, so this is the start capture function.
This is your Python code that
Yeah.
the user would be using if they're using Python.
Correct. So this is the Python wrapper to make these things a little more convenient, but it's not too involved. We create a request. We start setting things like this device serial number. We take the Python version of the logic device configuration and we put it into the serialized form, so on and so forth. And then we just issue a request, get a reply, and that's kind of it for start capture. Stuff like waiting for the capture is even simpler. We create a request, we put in a capture ID that we got from starting the capture, and then we just call wait capture. And then that will just block until the capture is actually finished.
Gotcha. So if you're using the pure generated gRPC binding for your language, this is kind of how you do it. And then what does it look like just from what does it look like? You guys have any examples of what it would look like for a really simple user case? Like what would the user actually be typing in Python to do something basic? We still have it before, but maybe
yeah,
like this one here, but
yeah, to do something basic, sure. If you're doing something really simple, like you don't need a glitch filter or a digital threshold, basically the only required stuff here is going to be this actually. If you want just default capture settings, you can just use this. You wouldn't, in this case, you wouldn't want to wait for the capture to finish because it won't. By default, it runs in looping mode. But you can go ahead and stop the capture. So if you're in a situation where you have your device under test, you're going to do some manipulations in here. Then this is what your whole app would look like if all you wanted to do is run a capture on something while you interact with it by the script.
Gotcha. What's that thing at the top here with the logging.basic config?
That's just for diagnostic purposes for our testing. That's not
so the user wouldn't have that there. They just have this
Probably
manager
not,
equals. No. So you make this manager object, set a port, and then you do manager.start capture with a bunch of info.
Yeah.
Now what's this serial number?
So that's so you can select the specific device connected to your computer. You can get the serial number through the app. Right now you do. We could set it up so that if you have the common case where only one device is connected, you can just admit it and we'll pick the default device. That's probably a good idea to have. But at the moment, it requires a serial number.
So what you'd have to do is do some sort of manager.get attached serial numbers and get the first one and set it's equal to.
Yeah. Or depending on your setup, if you know what serial number device you're going to use, you could put it in statically like we do here.
Right, like you do in here. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, definitely. I think we should make it just work by default. And frankly, even if there is multiple devices and it's ambiguous, I think just working with one of them by default, I would probably be better than throwing an error. I don't know. It's good. It's a good question. Okay, so cool. So you get the device, and then you say device configuration equals. Okay, so basically, which channels are set up, and like any kind of sample rates and such. Cool. And since there's no analog channels, then you don't need any analog sample rates or whatever.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, the only thing I can think of here would be interesting if you just had like a default object state, so or something like that, where just like it just kind of suggests. I don't know. Maybe that's not very useful. I guess there's no way to have like sort of a default. What I mean by that is just some sort of example. I guess people will be cutting and pasting from an existing example, so it'll be pretty easy to.
Yeah, it's hard. It'd be pretty hard for us to guess configuration that would be particularly useful.
Yeah,
I think
it wouldn't be, but it would just sort of work out of the box kind of get started. Cool. Okay.
Mhm.
Good deal. So this runs forever, however long. You mentioned before that you can configure how long you want it to run or when you want it to stop, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That would go in the same start command. It would go there. The start.
Yeah, that's what I had before with the trigger. So stopping at a trigger is one option. Another is stopping after a certain amount of time with no trigger. So this would capture for 5 seconds and then stop.
And then just for then let's say you did do capture dot wait, I guess, and then you would do capture dot save or something like that. How would you?
Yeah, we'd have to look at Ryan's code because I actually don't think I have that, or maybe I do have that on. I have part of that on this branch. So there's the raw CSV export is here on this branch.
Okay.
So yeah, you would do capture dot export raw data CSV or something along those lines,
Nice.
or you'd add an analyzer and have it go and do analysis and then export that data. Basically the same thing that Ryan was showing.
Cool. Is there any plans right now to I mean, in the near term, do this as part of some kind of marketplace, or is it for right now, like that's not part of the scope of what we're trying to do right now?
I don't think so. It may be useful to write some helper code for certain common situations into this wrapper. Right now, the wrapper is very simple layer over the gRPC, but there's certain things we've talked about, like automatically exporting to a temporary file and then loading your data into Python is one example where we could provide some extra functionality.
Gotcha. Now, in the open source world, when people build like these helper libraries and then they're targeted for a particular library or thing that they run on top of, right? How is that structured such that people can navigate that environment? In other words, is there a solution out there already where you can just be like, oh, well, these are all the things that are out there on GitHub that support the Salier automation library? You know, is there any way of, you know what I mean?
To be able to like enumerate them offhand.
Like how would you search for like, hey, I need extensions for, you know, this one framework I've been using in React, right? Or
Google.
Yeah.
It's I think the state of the art there. But yeah, that's a good point. One thing we could do is index that on our side in like a support article or something, is try and keep a list of useful libraries.
Yeah. The other thing is that if we publish it on like PyPy or something, if we kind of keep the naming consistent, where it's like Salier or something in there that people can search for, that is also kind of a good way to find related work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Salier is very searchable, and then if you add automation to that or something, you get pretty specific pretty quick.
Yeah, one thing you see a lot of on GitHub are like these awesome lists, which is like,
oh yeah,
basically collect what John kind of mentioned about indexing.
Curated list.
A lot of the stuff. Yeah, so it's just like curating a big list of Salier related extensions or libraries or what have you.
Gotcha.
The other thing is like the PyPy thing would only really relate to Python.
Exactly.
So for like C++, how do you find, you know, interesting packages? Yeah, which is like, okay, Google, you know, you kind of have to just use Google or index it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe so cool. So we got through the API, the user's experience of it, how it works behind the hood here in terms of our Python wrapper. we've got the gRPC, and then maybe we could take a peek at the other side of this. Like what's the other side of this thing looks like? You got some kind of gRPC socket server of some kind.
Yes. This is the file. So yeah, we set up a gRPC server. We have a bunch of different types of requests that we have all implemented. And then here's the start capture function, for example.
So that gets hit when you have a certain gRPC thing coming in.
Exactly.
Let's look at that one.
Yeah, it's a little bit involved. We have to go find the device based on the serial number. We have to create a new tab. We have to go and take the configuration data and apply it. That's a little bit involved, and there's a bunch of error cases, like if you have a sample rate that's not supported with your channel configuration, we have to handle that case. Then we also have all of the trigger settings in particular take a little bit to apply. And then finally, if all of that works out, we try and start the capture, and then we have a bunch of error handling here for different things that can go wrong during starting the capture. And then finally, if everything goes okay, we send a reply with that capture ID back to the user.
Gotcha. Nice. Now, so how does the user deal with errors? What's that experience look like on Python? Like, for example, if we go to your code and we type in an invalid sample rate, what happens?
Right now, it's we've only implemented part of this this functionality, but right now you'll just get a fairly descriptive error message. You can see down
so if you're an exception inside of Python, something like that.
Yeah, you'll get an exception set of Python, and it'll tell you have invalid sample rate. Here's what sample rates we support with the channels that you have selected.
Now you could, let's say you could catch this and you'd be right where you left off.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So you still have a valid manager in this case, right? And you could do something else with it.
Yeah. So we could actually do a copy and paste.
So if there's any error whatsoever within a single gRPC command, like you can continue as if you had never sent the command.
Yeah, in most cases that I can think of, you should be fine doing that.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't fix it on this one.
All right.
But yeah, that started 2 captures. First one failed, and then the second one
nice, cool,
goes through.
Cool. Now, one other question that might come up would be like, okay, you started this capture, and now the software's on its own. There's no babysitting happening, and it could run out of memory, or who knows what happens. What happens? Like, I don't know what would happen, but if the application somehow crashed, what happens on the gRPC side? Is there's like
you'll just get a disconnected socket error.
Okay.
If it crashes.
Right.
If certain others error conditions that don't crash the app happen. So for example, a big one is if you do run out of memory, you're doing a continuous capture and the buffer fills up. If you go and try and stop or the capture or wait for it, we have a mechanism here which will actually throw an error at that point. So you'll know if when you stop the capture or wait for it to finish, you'll get an error from that indicating that something went wrong during your capture and that you probably can't trust the results.
Okay, so you'll find that out when you try to block for the end or wait for the capture to be complete.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, what happens if the app completely crashes? Is that something where you could put some kind of handler on the gRPC?
Yeah, you could catch a gRPC exception. Though if the app completely crashes, then you'll need to restart it somehow
Right.
to resume.
So in our Python example there, if it did crash at some point, how would you catch that exception, or could you at this point?
At this point, catching that exception specifically would be kind of difficult. We have a plan we have error codes that are coming in with these errors. And we have a plan to convert those to some more friendly Python exceptions, but we haven't done that yet.
Okay. So theoretically, you do something like you put a catch around your entire Python code. And then if something happens, you could then like restart, basically launch the app again.
Yeah.
Right.
And then maybe Ryan, you could talk a little bit about like launching the app. Like we have some options to like launch the app, or how do you think about like whether the app's already running or not, or how many instances there are and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, so we haven't actually worked on this yet, other than kind of talking and planning it out. But ultimately, we're going to have a couple options. I think the primary use case is going to be something like running there's like two primary use cases. One, which is that the application is already running and you want to connect to it and do some sort of scripting.
Yeah.
The other one is that you want to launch the application, automate some of it, and then close it down. I think the latter is probably what we're going to see most people doing for any sort of automated testing. And in fact, probably running that in a headless environment. So that's something we are also planning on supporting. Everything we've been showing here is with the full application, which is super useful for actually writing your automation code and getting a visualization of what's happening. But ultimately, like once you get everything dialed in, you probably want, if you're just doing like automated testing or something, you probably just want to run that in a headless environment as part of like your CI or something like that. In that sort of case, you're probably just having your Python code or wherever you're programming from, start the application, connect to it, run a bunch of stuff, shut it down, pass, fail, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so at least from Python, what we're going to provide is the ability to connect to an existing instance of the application. So basically providing an IP and port. Usually, I mean, those will just be defaulted. So we'll provide, if you're just running the application normally, you have the automation server on as part of your settings or preferences. It'll just work. And then, so that would be, you can imagine that we're just going to have like a set of methods available on that manager object or something similar that allow you to connect to like an existing instance, launch a new instance, and then potentially a few other options. But those are kind of like the main two use cases. And for the like launching a new application, we would kind of take, as part of the Python library, that would take care of launching it, and then once the like manager object is destroyed, typically we have you use that inside of a context manager. So you'd say like with manager or with like launch application,
Right.
do all your stuff at the very end. Once that block exits, it would go and just close the application down.
Okay.
Anyway, we'll have some functionality in there to make it really easy to launch the application or connect to an existing instance.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I guess the only other question on that would be, by the way, John, you're still sharing if you want to stop sharing.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. Just one question on that would be, like, how do you know whether the app's running or not? I mean, I guess it maybe doesn't really matter, but like, for example, if you launch the app, maybe something like launch the application if it doesn't already exist, something like that.
So I mean, there's some different ways that I guess we could try to approach that. I don't think we're going to, I mean, certainly you could just try to connect to the default port, and if it's there.
Okay, so if it fails to connect,
launch it. Yeah, and there's some other ways you could try to just see if the process is even running.
Right.
I don't know if we're going to provide any sort of help or utility functions around that sort of use case. Maybe just like trying to connect to a default port, and if it's not there, just launching the application.
Yeah, as long as there's the ability to do it, like we don't need to put it in the core API. So
Yeah, and I mean, you were also asking about like having multiple instances of the application.
That's not like a main use
I-
case right now that we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard anything about
Yeah,
that, and
I agree.
I don't know. I mean, you could certainly do it, right? So what you can do is we'll have some command line arguments that you can use. So
To set the
again,
port,
like, what's that?
to set the port differently for different
Yeah,
instances.
to enable automation, set the port. So you could imagine launching multiple versions of the application that are running on different ports, and then you could interact with them separately.
Gotcha.
So
Cool.
you could do it, but
Right.
it's not like a
maybe a different use
thing
case
that
would
we're
be that
supporting here.
that you have like a central kind of like control center, so to speak, remotely, but you have multiple computers out there doing automations, right? In that case, they could all have the same port because they all have different IP addresses or however that would work, right? But if they were all the same VPN and you'd still be,
Yeah, so like connecting to an existing instance is kind of what that would fall under, I think. And you would just provide the IP and port of whatever, whatever instance you want to connect to. And that is something that we've heard people ask for, where they want to be able to kind of run this automation remotely, especially in this world where, now a lot of people are working from home and their actual test equipment is remote. But they do have access to it over the internet. So
yeah, well, I wonder if we could, not that I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but we could kind of broadcast some kind of, hey, like here I am, with the means to connect to your, you know what I mean? Otherwise, you do have to kind of figure out but maybe that's the right choice, is to make people responsible for their own IT situations, right? Rather than try to like figure a way to tell themselves out. And,
I mean, I think that's probably where we'll start. It's like,
for sure.
Yeah, I mean, for anybody out there, if for the people who are watching this, whoever you are, if you do have feedback, we're certainly open to it.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, we've already talked to a good number of people, but if we haven't talked to you and you're wanting to reach out, or you just want to give us some use cases that maybe we haven't talked about here, or you don't think we've thought of, yeah, definitely let us know.
Yeah, you can contact. Actually, I'm not sure what the best way is, but you can certainly send it to support@salia.com. If you want, you can send it to to Neil, the product guy, directly. I think that's an NELL@salia.com. Is that right? Or did I just
NEEL?
NEEL, right? And there's no last name though, right? So NEEL@salia.com.
Yep.
Cool.
There you go. Sorry, Neil.
Yeah,
throwing your email out there.
Yeah. Cool. By the way, if anybody misspells his email, it goes to me. So I'll forward it on. Cool. All right. Thanks a lot, Ryan and John. Awesome stuff. And what kind of, so we're planning on having kind of something out there for some initial use pretty quickly, and then we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah. The hope is, I don't want to give dates necessarily. I don't know. So I mean, I guess ideally in the next couple of weeks, we'd like to at least have, at a bare minimum, something that we can share with people. I don't know when we're going to have it in the, the release application and the production application.
Right.
And when we do, it'll probably be kind of like under an experimental sort of flag, meaning it might change. So ultimately, we want to get it out there, get it in front of people as soon as possible. We've already shared it with some people. It's like the same as before. If you're interested, send an email to Neil and we'll share it, because we'd like to get as much feedback as possible. So yeah. And then hopefully shortly after that, it'll actually be in the release application. But yeah, the main thing is we just want to make sure that we get feedback, make changes before we kind of consider it official.
Yep, exactly. Cool. Awesome. Hey, thanks very much for your time, guys. I'm excited about this. We'll get it out there.
Yeah, me too.
Right.
All right.
See you guys.
Bye. See ya.
Bye.